Hi, I'm Linh, currently a student studying in CSP school. And today, I would like to share my story, which begins when I was around 12 years old. First, before we begin, please take a look at these emojis. I have a question for you guys. Is anyone here of you guys familiar with these emojis? Or do you know the figurative meaning behind it? If you do know, please raise your hand. Oh, okay. So it seems like many of you guys do know what this means. And for the people who don't know, this is a very popular term for male masturbation. From a very young age, I was a very curious little girl. I remember trying all sorts of things, from eating sand, dog food, to all other sorts of crazy stuff. But that was with little Linh though. When I grew older, I started to become curious about other sorts of stuff. It was a very sunny day when my parents decided to go through my search history. And they found me Googling up this term. A little bit of a context though, this term blew up a few years ago, more specifically on TikTok. And while I didn't know what it means back then, curiosity has gotten the better of me, which is why I decided to Google it. However, I live in a very traditional and typical Asian family. I remember my dad has once told me that if I hold hands with the opposite genders, it might even get me pregnant. So, of course, being curious about this sort of thing was considered very inappropriate for me. However, forbidding actually did the opposite effect. More questions started to build up in my head. I questioned, is my curiosity wrong? Or is it wrong for me to be curious about the opposite sex and for other teenagers to be curious about sex as well? When choosing the topic for today's talk, I struggled a lot. I want to choose something that we all know about, but at the same time, I want to choose something that is not too general and something that we're still reluctant to talk about. While it seems like a mission impossible at first, I guess I have found it. Today, I want you guys to learn this word, comprehensive sexuality education. While it seems like a very big word at first, let me break it down for you guys. Comprehensive is the adjective which means to provide the full aspect of something. And sexuality education means giving young people the honest, age-appropriate knowledge about their own bodies, about their relationships. And this includes physical and reproductive health, as well as emotional understanding in relationships. To shorten things a little bit, I'm going to mention comprehensive sexuality education by the short term CSE. First, let's start with a very simple question. Where do young people actually learn about CSE? First of all, we must start with the parents. Remember the story I told you earlier about my parents scaring me that if I hold hands with the opposite genders, it might get me pregnant? Well, I believe that this sort of story is not only within my household. It is definitely not rare in Asian countries. Many parents are also hesitant. To prove my point, I decided to do a little bit of a research and found this interesting study, which is about parental perceptions of teenagers' sexuality in urban Vietnam. It is quite long, so I'm going to summarize it. There are three main groups of parents. The first one, they have admitted that they are embarrassed when talking about sexuality education with their young. They often dodge the topic when being asked about. The second group, though, reacted much more strongly, and they viewed CSE as something negative, something only suitable for adults, not teenagers. They also believe that learning about CSE can only further decrease the age of early sexual intercourse. The third group, on the other hand, they believe that CSE is the school's responsibility to teach their children and their youngs, not them. Which is why, as a result, many parents only talk about comprehensive sexuality education as a one-time big event, and eventually never mention about it again. Or when being asked about it, the subject will only be restricted to pregnancies. Schools also play a very important role in teaching about comprehensive sexuality education. This is my favorite biology book throughout my whole secondary grade. I know that some of you guys here are no longer studying this old curriculum. But if you did, you must know this very iconic book. For the people who do know, and the people who don't know, the juiciest part about this book must be its last chapter, which talked about the reproductive system. It got some very vibrant pictures and very fascinating information, which intrigued me, and I remember spending my whole summer break reading through it again and again. I wasn't interested in any other chapters though, often sleeping in class or doodling in class. But this one was the only exception. And little me was very excited to be learning about all of this thing. However, when the time eventually came, my teacher, my biology teacher, decided to skip the whole chapter, and instead, we were assigned some very boring presentation and were told to learn all of this by ourselves. Little me was incredibly disappointed. This is also a gap in the current way many schools are teaching comprehensive sexuality education. Until now, there is no standardized curriculum in order to teach CSE. Therefore, the teaching method is not yet synchronized. And in many of the schools, the subject is still vaguely integrated into other subjects, such as biology or chemistry. And since schools doesn't provide the adequate knowledge, and the parents are only waiting for schools, where do us teenagers find information from? Of course, the internet. I have another question for you guys. Does anyone of you guys here use this Threads or know this platform? If you do, please raise your hand again. Okay, thank you. Then for the people who don't know, this is a platform for young people to share their own stories, their questions, and their opinions. I was scrolling on Thread the other week when I stumbled across a post from this one girl. She was the same age as me. She was terrified after experiencing unconsented sexual intercourse. However, instead of seeking help from her parents, she didn't turn for help from her friends. She didn't turn for help from her teachers or relatives. She sought help from strangers online and decided to go anonymously on Thread. From her story, I actually saw a part of myself. As a Gen Z, we are considered the rebellious generation, the most open-minded and the most liberal one. However, when dealing with problems like this, many of us are still scared and reluctant. Online, I often share posts and articles that advocate for rights. Articles that is sex positive, but I have to admit, initially, when writing down the ideas for this talk, I was hesitant. I have to also admit that I still carry that prejudice that was taught by my parents when I was younger. However, I know that shouldn't have been the case, and it is very important that we shift that awkwardness to awareness. As the age of maturity is dropping, it is very important that we have the essential knowledge. It is also a part of our responsibility to taught ourselves, to know our own body, to know how to protect ourselves, and to know the symptoms of diseases. Only when we have the adequate knowledge can we make decisions based on logic, based on our health, and further prevent. This is my message to us teenagers. Please be open to sharing your own story and your experience, and also, please be open to asking questions and learn more and be curious. Thank you.